René Vincent was born in the French coastal town of Bordeaux in 1879. His father was the respected writer Charles Vincent, and his older brother Henri had a successful career as a painter. The family relocated to Paris when René was just 5 years old, and with an obvious talent for the visual arts, in his later teens he went on to study at Paris's École des Beaux-Arts, initially studying architecture. But even while still a student, he managed to pick up some illustration commissions, which kept him reasonably secure financially, and with this encouraging start he switched subjects to graphic art. The earliest dated examples of his work I found come from 1905, when he would have been 26 years old. This was a poster campaign for the bicycle, motorbike and car manufacturers Cottereau. The images he created were reproduced using traditional colour lithography and revealed a fondness for pretty girls and good-natured humour that would define the rest of his career. Vincent was a particularly keen motoring enthusiast, and from 1906 onwards he started creating a series of light humorous motoring scenes, which were reproduced as mass-produced offset litho prints, simply to be hung on the walls of other French devotees of this rapidly growing means of transport. And in the same year he became a popular choice to create illustrated catalogues using limited spot colour for the fashionable Belle Jardinière department store. And in 1908 he also created similar promotional literature, some of which was printed very attractively in full colour, for the affluent Parisian bourgeoisie's favourite store, Au Printemps. In that year he created his first of what would be a relatively small number of illustrations for Fantasio magazine, and he utilised his talent for the portrayal of slender beauties for a series of postcards, and also produced several more which indulged his own passion for driving with considerable comic effect. In 1909 the book Aeropolis, written by Henry Kistemakers, was published, with a limited colour cover and a series of line-only page illustrations by Vincent. As the title suggests, this was a light comedic fantasy inspired by air travel, which, like the motor car, had captured the imagination of many since its invention. And this commission and others revealed an increasingly sensitive and gestural use of fine line work, alongside a taste and affinity for generally frivolous subject matter. In the same year he was commissioned to illustrate an astonishingly lavish promotional book for the fashionable clothing store Paris Tailors. And I should immediately stress that what you are looking at are not finished artwork, but rough visuals for presentation to the client, with a series of lively expressive pen and ink sketches and some monochrome painted pages to give an idea of how the completed book would look. Space was left within the typographic text to show Vincent where illustrations were required and what part of the narrative they should illuminate. The whole publication was a light comedic parody of the 1001 Nights, featuring a fictional tailor from Baghdad. And I can't begin to imagine how much profit Paris tailors were making if this was an example of what they were prepared to create to amuse their well-heeled clients. I have no idea why it might be the case, but unfortunately this double-page spread constitutes the only example of finished artwork I could find. His infrequent association with Fantasio led to a couple of other illustrations in 1911, but at this time Vincent was far more involved with the production of a series of full-colour covers for the children's magazine Mon Journal and wash originals. These were particularly attractive illustrations blending line and wash with considerable balance to create plausible solidity in his characters and background work. I read nothing whatsoever to confirm that Vincent drew from observation, but I have to say I would struggle to imagine how such expressive posing could be achieved otherwise. He continued to create a large volume of more overtly commercial illustration, much of it for department store publicity. And in 1912 he also created this dynamic poster for Peugeot cars, with an uncharacteristic absence of his usual humour in favour of an evocation of speed and technology. A year or so later he produced another motoring themed poster with more typically jovial content for Michelin tyres, and it was at this time he also had his last illustrations for Fantasio published. The book Petite fille du temps passé by Albert Jacquin was published in 1914, and some at least of Vincent's illustrations featuring young girls in various historical contexts were reprints from his Mon journal covers of a couple of years before. Although I couldn't say for certain, it's more than possible they were actually all reprints, but those I'm showing here I could find no earlier trace of, and they deserve to be seen. Although by 1915 France had already been at war with Germany for a year, you might not have realised it from the upbeat nature of Vincent's work. He carried on making and selling any number of humorous motoring-themed prints, and some others which were images of cute children, although these did somewhat obliquely, and some might say inappropriately, reference military subjects. But the magazine illustrations he began creating at this time for both La Bayonnette and La Vie Parisienne ignored the conflict almost completely, with only occasional passing references to the war, generally suggesting that a man in military uniform wouldn't go short of female companionship. He wasn't the only French illustrator of the period who decided to avoid the terrible reality of war in favour of risque, light-hearted humour, but he was one of the most determined. And however in denial these images might have been, they were nevertheless a collection of finely drawn and amusing duotones, and I imagine quite literally a tonic for the troops. When the war and the consequent restrictions on print and commerce ended in 1918, Vincent resumed his usual levels of productivity and diversity. Magazine work, in particular for La Vie Parisienne, continued to be a regular source of income, and so did commissions for posters, brochures and press advertising. In 1920 he created a series of comical illustrations for a humorous booklet titled The Amazements of Hippocrates, to accompany text by Paul Rabou, which was sponsored by the pharmaceutical company Les Laboratoires Pepin et Labouque. Like all his work at this stage of his career, the line work and evocation of humorous but highly plausible figures was remarkably assured. And although only limited colour washes were used in these illustrations, it mattered little given their quality. In the early years of the decade he returned to the creation of remarkably well conceived and executed lithographic posters for various department stores, which although possessed of considerable elegance were also tempered with a little good-natured humour. And I found a few other images such as this golfing illustration and a series of jocular monochromes on the themes of the perils of motoring, but I have no idea where they were published. The same is true for a collection of light-hearted colour images on the theme of skiing and other winter activities, also gaining considerable traction with the wealthier in society at the time. It's possible they were for publication in American or British magazines, and it is known that however briefly he did work in the USA around this time, although the only evidence I could dig up was a colour cover and single-page duotone joke for the American humour magazine Judge. He did design this poster for the LNER Railway in Britain too, but he did so while based in France, and it seems that other than his brief stay in the USA, any work for overseas clients was mailed there. The outpouring of work produced up to 1925 was nothing short of incredible, and he had certainly found himself a suitable regular haunt in La Vie Parisienne. And the covers and large volume of duotone page illustrations he created invariably focused on romantic and occasionally comedically suggestive encounters between the sexes. More posters for a wide range of clients from motoring through to cosmetics were created. And more significantly, it was at this time that he began an enduringly successful professional association with the department store Bon Marche, with a large volume of posters, most of which were aimed at the predominantly fashion-conscious females who made up the great majority of the clientele. Most of these involved his graceful evocations of slim, languidly posed elegant women to promote clothing fabrics and perfume offered in store. But unlike a lot of other fashion-based imagery of the period, Vincent's images never took themselves too seriously. And of course this applied even more when his target demographic was the offspring of the store's clientele. In the middle of the decade he brought the same seductive sensibilities to bear for a press campaign for Abdullah cigarettes, which made the most of a limited two-colour print run and succeeded in making this now generally vilified habit look like the height of sophistication and glamour, just as in the films of the period. By the later years of the 1920s, he had apparently ended his long association with la vie parisienne in favour of advertising work, in which context he continued to be a ubiquitous and popular presence. Marketing literature and posters for cars and car-related products such as oil and petrol were ever present, some of which played up the more glamorous aspects of car ownership, while others were manifestly more lightly humorous. That they were all compelling, well considered and skillfully executed really goes without saying. But he wasn't restricted to motoring advertising work, and he also created a wide range of other posters, including yet more in his role as illustrator of choice for the Bon Marche store. And in 1928, Vincent was commissioned to illustrate a brochure in full colour, depicting the pleasures on offer in and around the luxurious Hermitage Hotel in the northwest French resort of Le Touquet. His knack for glamour and sophistication made him a highly desirable commodity for such clients. This motoring press ad aimed at female drivers from the late 1920s provides a rare opportunity to see the precision of the pencil-drawn image which was the origin of the artwork. And in addition to the many car manufacturers who continue to queue up for his spectacularly successful poster designs, Rene commissioned him to create monochrome illustrations featuring their vehicles and the associated lifestyle for a press campaign in 1929. Similarly, Shell Oil utilised his more comedic side for their monochrome press ad campaign at the same time. But he was just as in demand from non-motoring clients, with illustrations such as this elegant colour press ad for Omega watches. And in 1930, he carried on producing yet more for the popular ongoing Bon Marche campaign, now in its 6th year. He also had considerable success from 1930 onwards with an ad campaign which used Vincent's undoubted prowess with engaging child characters for the French Tobacco Authority to promote French brands above foreign imports. However bizarre and wildly inappropriate this may seem to us now, almost a century ago nobody would have batted an eye, and just found them as amusing as they were intended to be. His illustrations of appealing youngsters continue to feature in more appropriate contexts, including yet more advertising work. And these images, which I don't know for sure, but believe to have been produced as prints for display in the homes of the French public. At this time, the quality and vivacity of his images used on posters and in press ads couldn't be matched by any of his contemporaries. And the enduring nature of his professional relationships with clients bore testament to his ability to more than meet the commercial and creative demands of the brief, and in the process maintain his immense popularity with the public at large. Unlike many of his rivals in this period, Vincent's posters, although immensely stylish, shun the tendency towards blockish geometric abstractions, as dictated by the prevailing Art Deco sensibility, which was dominant in France and the rest of Europe at this time. And as such, nobody was ever in any doubt that it was his skillful hand, eye and imagination at work in the image. But having said that, Vincent also had work published throughout his career using several pseudonyms, such as René Vincent, Ragout and Dufour. And a couple of sources assert this was in order to produce work in a range of styles. If that was indeed the case, it must have been a conspicuous failure, as he was surely fooling nobody about his true identity. And in addition to many other popular commercial successes, in 1931 he created what is now his most enduring and iconic poster of a young attractive couple drinking Ramos Pinto port from the same glass offered up by a cherub. As the 1930s unfolded, Vincent appeared to be an unstoppable force in advertising, even if he had by now left books and magazine work behind. He was still the illustrator of choice for Bon Marche and was just as popular as the visual ambassador for the cigarette industry, with any number of brands to his credit. Cars and motoring related manufacturers were still among his regular clientele, with some very pleasing humorous images, as well as this iconic, more serious, dynamic poster for Bugatti Motors. Dotted around these enduringly popular themes in his work was a host of other posters, brochures and press ads, advertising domestic products for a wide range of clients, all of them eager to have the Vincent treatment, either humorous or glamorous or even both. And the persistence and quality of his imagination and graphic abilities was nothing less than astonishing in its consistent application. And it looked very much like he would go on for quite some time yet to create similar work for the foreseeable future. But sadly, René Vincent wasn't destined to be around for the long haul, and at the height of his commercial success, he died of unknown causes in the western coastal town of Sarzeau in 1936 at the age of only 57. We will never know what he might have gone on to achieve if he had lived longer, but I for one am eternally grateful that however woefully unrecorded his actual life is, there is nevertheless a decent amount of splendid illustration work to remember him by. In the same time frame as Vincent, other French poster artists such as A.M. Cassandra and Paul Collin were also riding high, and for reasons I don't really understand, their memory has endured much better. But for me at least, however much I admire both these illustrators, the light humorous touch and more naturalistic, good-humoured and quintessentially human qualities of Vincent's work simply cannot be equalled and are certainly no less welcome. And as evidence of his colossal creative output, as usual here are yet more examples of his work I couldn't squeeze into the narrative.